Hey folks, welcome to Role of Law. Today I want to talk about something that's a big challenge for a lot of people when they're trying to start a campaign, and that's setting. You've got a bunch of players at your table, they're going to make characters who are going to go on heroic adventures, but where are they going to do these things? What is the world like? What is the immediate surroundings like? Where is this going to happen? And this is a problem in part because it can be a fair bit of work depending on how you go about doing it, and there's ways to cut down that work, which we'll talk about. But it's also very front loaded. People are going to want to have a lot of this stuff kind of ready to go because they may have questions about this when they're making their characters, because they don't want to make a character who doesn't fit with your world. And they may also, you're going to need some sort of setting for when you're starting your adventure. Where's this stuff happening? If the local town is being attacked by orcs, what's the local town? Like, where is this place? So this is a bit of a challenge, and I'll talk about some ways to deal with it. The first way to deal with this is to use a published existing setting. Places like Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk are already out there, and you can pull them off the shelf. They've got years and years and years of development work put into them by professional teams, and so there's a ton of material. So that's the advantage. The disadvantage is pretty much the same thing. If you're a new DM and you're just pulling Forgotten Realms off off a shelf, there's all sorts of stuff that you're not going to be familiar with. And you may have a player at your table who goes, well, that's not actually the case. Now, the way to get around this is pretty much by applying sort of a principle I'll call did I stutter? And what that means is that you're going to get the setting wrong in various ways. And in fact, I would get, all of these settings wrong in various ways because I'm not some scholar on Forgotten Realms. And so sometimes you're going to contradict the existing material. And the way you have to move through that is pretty much to just say, well, this is how things are different. Now, I don't actually like running published settings for that reason. I don't like the feeling that I'm out of control of the world, that there's all sorts of material out there that might sort of surprise me or ambush me. And for a new DM, I actually think that this is a potential issue if you have one of those players at the table. Now, you are going to know your table better than I do. If your table is going to be cool with all that and not cause you any sort of grief over that, then fantastic. Go ahead. But if you've got people who are going to sort of try to hold you to the existing setting, and if that's going to be a source of strife, it may be better to just make something up that's just your own. Now, this can be a challenge, if you've never sort of flexed those creative muscles, but it's worth doing. I personally am a big fan of making my own worlds. I've made a whole bunch of them, and sort of one that I keep developing and may eventually try to put out as a published work of my own, but I'm a long way from that. All right, so let's say instead that we're going to create our own setting. Now, this is a bit daunting because we're trying to create a whole world. And a whole world is huge, right? Think about all of the places that you have been or heard about. There's going to be a lot of differences, and you can zoom in. I don't know my own city well enough to tell you, for instance, if you asked me how many butcher shops are there, I could only guess. So there's a lot of potential complexity there, and we really need to narrow this down because you can't create a whole sort of Skyrim universe for session one. And your players will be really upset if you're saying, hey, listen, I would love to play with you guys. We're going to get a game going, and I'll see you in 3 years. They're not going to wait. So we want something that we can get going fairly quickly. Now, I approach this by sort of trying to eat, like a submarine sandwich, you want to eat it from the ends rather than sort of trying to dive in at the middle. And the ends here are to either go really big or really small. Now, when I say go really big here, we're going to do a bit of both. So really big questions are things like, what is this world about? What kind of theme is it? Is it something that's kind of Tolkien-esque? Lots of campaign settings are, sort of Tolkien-esque. Is it something that is kind of like ancient Rome or ancient Greece? Maybe it's set in the Paleolithic era. This is kind of a big picture question that is a good one to answer. And then you also are going to want to look at small, very narrow questions. I recommend starting off, especially if you're a new DM, in a very small town. Something that's a village size because it's very manageable. And it also allows you to answer the question of why can't somebody else do this when you're dealing with, first level characters and first level problems. If the issue is that there's, kobolds who are stealing grain, the party might ask, well, why can't the guard do it? And this is a really easy question to answer if you're set on the village scale, because the guard is probably, Bob, and he's one guy with a sword that isn't all that great, that was passed down to him. And it's just out of his league. So they need you, the heroes, to go and do these things. So I really like starting out in a small village. And this allows you to go in two different directions as the campaign grows. One, sometimes your players will adopt the village. And I've seen this happen a number of times. And then you can basically slowly grow this town into a thriving concern over time. And that's a lot of fun. People can sort of encourage the growth of this and have a real connection to this one place. The other option, of course, is the small town heroes go to the big city, and then that allows you a different set of adventures and a different set of things you can get up to. So those are directions that you can branch out, and so I really recommend a small town. Now, when we're designing this small town, you don't need to come up with a whole lot, but a small village is much easier to design than a big city. And you can just kind of design it by throwing things out there. We can start with a name, and the name is really the least important thing, but something like Bywater or, Hampton or something just kind of villagey works just great here. And I like to start by thinking of a couple of things that might be things that are done in this town. What are the economic engines of this town? So maybe this town has farming, there's people who ranch pigs, and there's also a number of people who do legume farming. So now I've got sort of some basics there. And once I've thought of sort of one or two or maybe three kind of industries like this, I can start thinking about and you don't need to think for a lot about this. You can just kind of play in your head with, well, what are the downstream effects? So if we've got a bunch of hog farmers in this town, well, then we probably have butcher shops and slaughterhouses that process the meat. We've probably got, maybe a smoker that turns the meat into something that can be traded with other towns. We probably have a tannery to allow them to sell those goods further on. And, we've probably got a blacksmith to make nails for the fencing, this kind of thing. So now we've got some ideas of what kind of places might be in our town, and we've pretty much got an economy. At this stage, we've got an economy that is functional. So now we can go back and look at the big picture again. We're going to sort of eat this sandwich from both sides. So we've decided that maybe our world is kind of Tolkien-esque, right? That's a very common setting design. And now I might say, okay, well, what is a big conflict in the world? So 10 years ago, a wizard opened up a dimensional portal and let a very nasty demon in the world. That demon has been opening little rifts, and there's a big problem with demonic forces starting to become a major threat. It's not yet thrown the world into chaos or anything like that, but people are very concerned. Now we've got sort of a plot engine here. We've got something that will develop in our world, and this is, a great thing. And then we can go back to the small end and we can say, okay, we've got this town. Well, who runs this town? Maybe we need a mayor. And so what kind of person do we want for our mayor? I can decide, okay, our mayor is maybe somebody who's a little brash, and I'm just kind of throwing things out here. I'm just kind of spitballing. And you may find this easier to do with, there's NPC generators out there that you can, or just sometimes flipping through and just thinking of adjectives. Maybe this guy he used to be a hog farmer, and, because we've already said we've got hog farming here. And, so he's really concerned about this, but there's some tension because maybe the legume farmers think he favors the hog farmers too much. Maybe there's fights over who's got which land and whether or not the runoff from one farm is getting on the other. And so, is this guy experienced? Well, it's a small village. Let's say he's sort of inexperienced, but he really means well. He's trying to do good things. Okay, we've got a mayor. Now I can jump back over and look at something else on the big picture. And you don't need to sort of flip back and forth too much here, but you can, using this uh, in an evening, you can probably get enough together that you've both got a vibrant small town that people can, that people can feel connected to. You want something where there's enough energy to it and enough life to it that people are going to say this is something that feels real and that they can make a real connection to. But you also want to be able to answer questions for just general character creation stuff. And a lot of those are going to be the big picture questions. You can also guide some of your big picture questions by talking to your players. Your players may say, listen, we'd rather play in something other than a Tolkien-esque setting. How about, and then you could say, well, maybe something, in a post-apocalyptic fantasy world or something like that. They may ask questions like, hey, I'm thinking of playing a cleric. Is there sort of I'm thinking I want to play a god of like defending the hearth and the home. So something that is sort of a defender deity, but also kind of a homey deity. I'm thinking, a halfling god, something like that. And you can say, yes, there is. And then you can plug that in and start shaping the question of which gods exist in your world around that. And I'll probably do an entire video about addressing religion in a 5e campaign, because that can be a whole complicated thing. Now, in terms of, what you're going to do for your small town, you don't really need a map, but it can be really helpful. One I really like, and I'm going to link in the description below, is this one here. I'm just going to sort of pull over here. Now, you can see it's already got a city up here. This is too big for what I want. I want smaller. I might have the characters move to some place like this after a bit, but instead I can just go menu, generate, and I want a small town. All right. Now, I already said I was going to call it Bywater, and you can rename this on your little map here, but I want something with some water to it. Now, this isn't too bad. It's got a little harbor. It's got little, towns, but you can keep sort of generating until you see something you want. I think this is a little bigger than I want. So I'm just going to... All right, how's this? So we've got some little, neighborhoods here. And so I can just put that away. You can see we've got farms nearby. This is not bad. So I can just run with this and say, yeah, this is what our small town looks like. It's, again, a map isn't necessary, but it's one of those things that can help people feel connected to it. And if you have somebody, for instance, who wants to, they want their character to build a house or buy a house, they might say, listen, I really want my character to live by the river, but I want them to live on the east side of the river here, over by, Smoke Bridge, rather than over on this side. This also gives you some neighborhoods, and that can also start making you think a little bit more about your town. Maybe we've decided that Dog Park, because it's next to these farms, it's not the nicest area of town, because we've already said we've got hog farming here. And so maybe there's a bit of a smell. Maybe that's not so great. And then maybe Duskbank is where a lot of their, their products get loaded onto barges to be sold to other towns. Because keep in mind, waterways are used a lot in sort of this kind of era for trade and travel. So this is probably where they're doing a lot of the processing and where a lot of those things get, sold on. So this is kind of our trade district. And that leaves us with sort of Smoke Bridge, which is probably, now we've got this as sort of where our people live, housing and so forth, maybe administrative stuff. Maybe I like this building here, this one right up next to the road here. Maybe I think that's going to be sort of the community center, the mayor's hall. And I think I'm going to decide that these east side buildings are Where the nice housing is, this is sort of the richest area of this small village. Because again, it's a small village. You're not going to have a whole bunch of like super rich people there. It's not going to be, this is a medieval era. The real nobility's not living in this small hog farming town. So that gives us a really good idea. And all of this, was done pretty much on the fly. I can tell you what prep I did for this before I sat down to record this video, which is that I basically decided that I was going to design my entire starting town around pork and beans. So from the idea of pork and beans, we basically now have a perfectly viable starting town. And I can start creating more NPCs as we go. If the players go and visit a blacksmith, well, now I, can throw a blacksmith together. And there's all sorts of tricks, which will be in another video as to how to kind of improvise an NPC on the fly. But you'll notice that in all of this, I've left out the middle. Where is, we've decided that this is the town of Bywater. And lots of points if you can guess what that's, or if you can figure out what that's a reference to. But, I haven't decided what kingdom Bywater is in. Who is the overarching ruler of Bywater? Don't need to know that yet, because right now people are just going to need to know the mayor. Later on, I can fill in all of those details, and you can do this sort of over time in between sessions. You run a session and you say, okay, we've got, this far along on our adventure. You can spend a little bit of extra time and fill in your setting as you go. Maybe after Bywater, you know that they're going to go to a bigger city. And so then you're going to just start thinking about what this city is going to look like and what the personality is. So I think that this is a way to sort of break things up into manageable chunks. This is sort of how I think about things when I've got a group who says, hey, we want to do something and it's fairly short notice. I start thinking really little and really big. So, yeah, hopefully this has been helpful to people. I think that this is something that causes people a lot of consternation. I've watched a lot of DMs struggle with this, either because they start up a game and you're kind of in Townsville and nobody knows what Townsville's like, especially not the DM. That can be a bit of a problem because you're sort of in this nebulous, amorphous place that doesn't feel real. Similarly, you need to be able to answer some of the questions about, like, what is this place like? Is it normal that there's orcs that are, nearby? This is the kind of question that you might have to come up with an answer to on the fly. But if you already have some sense of what your town is like, once you already have that core, it's a lot easier to improvise extensions to it than it is to sort of come up with things out of nothing. So it really provides you with a framework for further improvisation, further development, and further creativity. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I really hope that this has been helpful. As I mentioned in some of my previous videos, I'm really trying to aim a lot of this at people who are coming to D&D maybe for the first time and sort of trying to address some of the things that I found to be a challenge when I was starting out way back when. So hopefully this is a useful trick for you guys, and let me know in the comments below if you have any thoughts, if there's anything that you think I should fill out, anything you think I'm missing here. And again, I'll leave a link to this particular generator in the comments below. It's one I really like, but there's lots of them out there. So if you find one you like better, feel free to use that. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you guys next time.